Chapter 1. The Swan Prince. The sky above Nymphenburg Palace was an iron curtain, veiling the heavens as if Bavaria itself recoiled from the fate it had birthed. Inside the vast palace, candlelight flickered along gilded walls, brushing over tapestries and oil portraits of rulers long past. On the night of August 25, 1845, Crown Princess Marie of Prussia gave birth to a child destined for legend, a boy who would one day become known as the Mad King. Ludwig Otto Friedrich Wilhelm entered the world in silence. The midwives, sworn to secrecy, would later speak in hushed voices about the ominous chill that swept the chamber at the moment of his birth. He barely cried, but his wide sapphire eyes stared with an intensity that unsettled all who saw him. From his earliest years, Ludwig was an enigma. While other boys wrestled and tumbled in the royal gardens, Ludwig wandered alone, speaking to imaginary knights and swans. He built tiny castles out of snow and reenacted scenes from Wagnerian operas he had never seen. His father, King Maximilian II, viewed these tendencies as weakness. The king valued pragmatism, the stoic virtues of governance. Ludwig, however, belonged to a different world, one of dreams, of legends, of an unreachable past. At age 10, Ludwig discovered the legend of Lohengrin, the Knight of the Swan, and became obsessed. He read the tale again and again, captivated by the image of a noble hero arriving across a moonlit lake to defend the helpless. The swan became his symbol, and Ludwig began signing letters with its silhouette beside his name. In his education, Ludwig excelled in poetry, mythology, and music, but lagged behind in mathematics and law. His tutors, frustrated by his whims, often reported that the young prince would spend hours staring into mirrors or reciting entire scenes from Schiller's plays to an empty room. But he was not unintelligent. On the contrary, Ludwig possessed a vast, if peculiar, intellect. His younger brother, Otto, more conventionally minded, often stood in his shadow. Yet even Otto could not deny that Ludwig's imagination burned with a rare fire. It was as if Ludwig had been born into the wrong century, a misplaced soul from the age of troubadours and sacred quests. When King Maximilian died in 1864, Ludwig ascended to the throne at just 18. Bavaria, a Catholic kingdom in the shadow of Prussia and Austria, stood at a crossroads. The German Confederation was fracturing, and the idea of a united Germany loomed. The ministers hoped Ludwig would be a puppet king, young, malleable, distracted. They were half right. In his early days as monarch, Ludwig was handsome and charismatic. Tall, with striking features and a melodious voice, he charmed the public with his romantic ideals. He declared that he would be a king of the people, a guardian of art and beauty. And indeed, one of his first royal acts was to invite the composer Richard Wagner to court. Wagner, an exiled genius drowning in debt, found in Ludwig both a savior and a muse. Their correspondence blossomed into a strange, emotionally charged relationship. Ludwig funded Wagner's operas, commissioned new works, and built him a home near Lake Starnberg. In return, Wagner fed Ludwig's mythic imagination, encouraging the young king's belief in his divine mission. But whispers began to spread. The court gossiped about the letters Ludwig wrote to Wagner, filled with effusive language, declarations of spiritual love. Though there is no proof their bond was ever physical, Ludwig's evident romantic obsession became ammunition for enemies within the government. He had yet to marry. He avoided women. His aloofness and nocturnal habits stirred unease. Yet Ludwig did not care. He had begun to withdraw from politics, delegating state affairs to ministers while he poured his energy into a singular passion, building castles. He envisioned sanctuaries from the modern world, places where beauty and legend could reign unchallenged. The first was Neuschwanstein, New Swan Stone, perched high in the Bavarian Alps, modeled after the castles of Germanic folklore. Construction began in 1869, and from the start, it was an exercise in fantasy over function. Rooms were shaped like grottos, corridors led to artificial caves, and murals depicted scenes from Parsifal and Tristan und Isolde. Neuschwanstein consumed Ludwig. He visited the site in secret, sometimes disguised as a peasant. He spent hours speaking with architects, demanding impossible alterations, sketching designs himself. Money evaporated. The Bavarian treasury warned him, Parliament questioned him, but Ludwig dismissed their concerns. "I am not of this world," he once told his chamberlain. "I belong to no time." As Neuschwanstein rose from the cliffs, Ludwig began work on another dream. Linderhof, a miniature Versailles, buried in the forest, with golden fountains and secret chambers. Then came Herrenchiemsee, a replica of the Sun King's palace, built on an island, accessible only by boat. He almost never lived in these castles. They were not homes, but sanctuaries for his soul, stage sets for the eternal opera he played in his mind. At night, Ludwig would ride alone through the woods in a gilt sleigh drawn by white horses, speaking to the moon. He dined alone, issued edicts by candlelight, and spoke to portraits. The ministers watched with growing alarm. Ludwig had accumulated enormous personal debt, borrowing against future taxes. He refused to marry, and his few engagements were mysteriously broken. Rumors of affairs with young grooms and actors circulated, but beyond scandal there was a deeper concern. Ludwig no longer distinguished fantasy from reality. His letters revealed a man who believed himself chosen by God to revive the Holy Grail. He referred to himself as the Moon King, and spoke of Wagner's operas as divine revelations. In 1886, the ministers had had enough. They enlisted psychiatrists to examine the king. In absentia, 4 doctors signed a declaration that Ludwig was insane, based largely on testimonies from disgruntled servants. On June 10, 1886, he was arrested at Neuschwanstein and transported to Berg Castle on Lake Starnberg. 2 days later, Ludwig was found dead in the lake alongside Dr. Bernhard von Guden, one of the psychiatrists who had signed his declaration of madness. The official story claimed drowning, but Ludwig was a strong swimmer, and von Guden's body showed signs of strangulation. The truth remains buried beneath the lake's still waters. In death, Ludwig became what he had always longed to be. A legend, his castles, once symbols of extravagance, became icons of beauty. Neuschwanstein is now visited by millions, a fairy tale fortress frozen in time. His life, filled with longing and loneliness, speaks to the cost of dreaming in a world ruled by pragmatism. And somewhere, in the echo of a Wagnerian chorus, one can almost see him, the Swan Prince riding alone beneath the stars, forever searching for a kingdom that never truly existed. Chapter 2. The Secret Kingdom. The early days of Ludwig's reign had brought the breathless thrill of possibility. But as time crept onward, the king receded into a twilight world of illusion and melancholy. His court became a hushed place of whispers, candlelight, and velvet curtains, always drawn against the sun. Though ministers bustled about with reports and proclamations, Ludwig himself was often unreachable, not in location, but in spirit. In the labyrinthine passages beneath Neuschwanstein, Ludwig commissioned secret rooms, a mirrored chamber lit only by moonlight through hidden slits, a circular throne room with no throne, frescoes of imaginary kings, and a private chapel with no priest. A kingdom within a kingdom, he called it. Not for subjects, but for shadows and songs. He would spend nights wandering its halls, dressed in velvet robes and jeweled slippers, speaking to the walls, quoting poetry, and invoking Wagner's characters as if they lived just beyond the next column. He staged private plays in which he played every role, conversing with invisible queens and knights. Sometimes he wrote letters to dead monarchs, sealing them with swan-shaped wax and leaving them in his chapel's altar. No one was allowed to enter these halls unless summoned. And when summoned, servants were instructed to speak in whispers, bow deeply, and avoid eye contact. One chamberlain, who made the mistake of entering without announcement, was banished from court for life. Ludwig ruled his secret kingdom with a dreamy tyranny, demanding perfection in its imaginary laws. Linderhof, too, became more than a retreat. In its gardens, Ludwig ordered the construction of a Venus grotto, modeled after the set of Tannhäuser. Inside the man-made cave, colored lights illuminated an artificial lake. A golden swan boat drifted silently on the water, while Wagner's arias echoed through hidden speakers powered by a newly installed dynamo, one of the first uses of electricity in Bavaria. It was here that Ludwig enacted his most personal fantasies. He would arrive in costume, a knight, a poet, sometimes even a deity, and sit alone as the music swelled, the light played across painted stalactites, and the scent of roses filled the air. He was at once ruler and audience, dreamer and dream. Time ceased. In his solitude, Ludwig wrote a manifesto he called The Mirror of Kings. It was never published, but its fragments remain. In it, he proclaimed that modernity was a sickness, that machines were the death of the soul, and that art was the only salvation. He believed monarchy must return to its divine origins, not to govern but to inspire. Let others lead armies and balance budgets, he wrote. I shall build worlds. His architectural visions became more elaborate. He dreamed of a Byzantine temple in the Alps, a crystal palace floating on a lake, a theater carved from a single block of white marble. He sketched designs obsessively, sending pages to his architects at all hours. Most of these plans never left the page, but they filled drawers, chests, and entire rooms. The royal household began to fray. Servants complained of working at impossible hours, of being sent into snowstorms to fetch swan feathers or rare wines. His cooks were instructed to prepare elaborate feasts for one. Entire orchestras were summoned for midnight performances, where Ludwig sat alone in shadow. Yet there were moments of clarity too. Ludwig had a way of speaking that mesmerized even the most skeptical ministers. When he did choose to engage with politics, his insight could be sharp and disarmingly poetic. He argued for arts education, for the preservation of Bavarian identity, and even suggested reforms to limit corruption among the nobility. But such episodes were fleeting. The deeper Ludwig ventured into his dream world, the more the world around him began to close in. Journalists mocked him as a recluse. Foreign ambassadors whispered about his lunacies, and his cousin, Prince Luitpold, began making quiet inquiries about regency. Still, Ludwig persisted. In the rare letters he answered, he signed not as King of Bavaria, but as Ludwig of the Night, or Swan of the Silver Cross. He had taken to sleeping during the day and rising at dusk. His windows were shuttered to the sun. His carriages were redesigned to resemble Roman chariots, drawn by white horses, wheels painted gold. Then came the year 1885. A final design, the boldest of them all, emerged. Falkenschloss, the Castle of the Falcon. Perched atop a cliff that barely seemed to allow construction, it was to be a Gothic cathedral fused with a Romanesque keep. It would be a place of prophecy, Ludwig said. He claimed that a vision had come to him of a final castle, one where he would be crowned not as King of Bavaria, but as King of the Spirit. He began transferring funds in secret. The government, already anxious, discovered that Ludwig had signed promissory notes totaling millions. His ministers, fearing financial collapse, could delay no longer. But Ludwig remained unaware or unwilling to acknowledge the storm gathering around him. In his mind, he had crossed a threshold. The waking world faded, and his imagined realm grew vivid. "The veil is thinning," he wrote. "Soon I shall pass fully into the land of legend."
Chapter 3.
Betrayal at Berg. The storm broke on a warm June evening. Word came swiftly but quietly. Ludwig was to be deposed. The ministers, acting under the authority of Prince Luitpold, had finalized their coup. 4 court-appointed psychiatrists had signed the declaration of his madness. No formal interview had been conducted, no personal testimony heard. Yet the papers were enough. On June 10, 1886, a small group of officials and guards departed for Neuschwanstein. They arrived under cover of darkness. Ludwig's valet tried to resist, but was quickly subdued. The king, in a chamber wreathed in candlelight and mirrors, received them in his violet robe embroidered with stars. He did not protest. He asked only, "Have they sent Judas to fetch me?" They brought him to Berg Castle, on the shores of Lake Starnberg, once a beloved retreat of his. There, Ludwig was placed under house arrest. Guards were posted at every exit. His cousin Luitpold declared himself regent. Inside Berg, Ludwig paced the rooms with cold fury. His notes from those final days, preserved in fragments, speak of betrayal, fire, and visions. He likened himself to Christ and Prometheus, condemned for bringing beauty to the unworthy. The only person he would speak with was Dr. Bernhard von Gudden, the very man who had signed his commitment. Von Gudden, a staunch rationalist, believed Ludwig might be rehabilitated. He arranged daily walks along the lake's edge, hoping that air and conversation would calm the king's thoughts. Ludwig remained cryptic and distant. He asked about the nature of death. He mused aloud whether legends could resurrect reality. On the evening of June 13, 1886, Ludwig and von Gudden left the castle grounds for a walk. The weather had turned oppressive, with a low fog curling over the lake like a burial shroud. Hours passed. Neither man returned. A search party was sent. Near midnight, they found both bodies floating in the shallows. The official story claimed drowning. Yet Ludwig was a strong swimmer. No water was found in his lungs. Von Gudden's body bore bruises around the neck, consistent with strangulation. No witnesses, no investigation. The incident was closed, labeled a tragedy. But speculation, once unleashed, is difficult to bury. Conspiracy theories flourished. Some claimed Ludwig had tried to escape, and von Gudden blocked his way. Others whispered that Ludwig had been assassinated by guards, under orders from high-ranking officials. There was even a tale that Ludwig had survived, fleeing to live in disguise in the Alps, watching silently as his castles became monuments to a man presumed dead. The funeral procession moved through Munich in solemn silence. Thousands wept openly. As his coffin passed, flowers rained from balconies. The same politicians who condemned him now praised his vision. The same newspapers that mocked him declared him tragic and noble. In death, Ludwig became a legend, and high in the mountains, Neuschwanstein stood gleaming in the mist, untouched and eternal, a fortress not of stone, but of dreams. Chapter 4. Echoes of the Moon King. The death of Ludwig II did not bring peace. It brought questions, and with them, a strange kind of resurrection. As Bavaria moved forward under Prince Luitpold's regency, the memory of the deposed king began to haunt the collective mind of the nation. Neuschwanstein was the first to transform. Initially dismissed as a costly folly, the castle was opened to the public just weeks after Ludwig's burial. Thousands came, expecting gaudy opulence. Instead, they were awed. the tapestries of swans and knights, the towering frescoes of Siegfried and Lohengrin, the dripping artificial cave, each room whispered of beauty unmoored from time. Visitors wept. Artists sketched feverishly. Journalists penned melancholic odes. Slowly, the narrative shifted. Ludwig, once ridiculed, became a romantic martyr. His eccentricity was rebranded as visionary. The man who had fled the world became the king who foresaw it. Yet even as tourists lined up outside the gates, rumors simmered beneath the surface. Locals spoke of strange sightings. A rider cloaked in silver, seen crossing the lake at night. Lights flickering in towers long unlit. Songs echoing through empty corridors. Some said Ludwig's spirit refused to leave. At Linderhof, gardeners claimed roses bloomed out of season. At Herrenchiemsee, staff swore they heard footsteps in sealed wings. One maid, interviewed decades later, recalled hearing Wagner's music playing faintly from the Venus grotto, despite no electricity being present. The legend grew. Writers, poets, and playwrights embraced Ludwig as a symbol. Thomas Mann referenced him in veiled language. Painters captured his likeness, not as a monarch, but as a myth. Sigmund Freud cited his case when discussing the boundaries of genius and madness. But nowhere was Ludwig's resurrection more palpable than in the minds of the Bavarian people. Each retelling softened his flaws, sharpened his dreams. His loneliness became nobility. His castles became shrines. His sorrow became their inheritance. By the early 20th century, Ludwig had become inseparable from Bavaria's identity. Postcards bore his image beside mountain peaks. Songs were written in his name. Tour guides dressed as knights led visitors through halls he had never fully inhabited. Yet beneath the adoration, deeper questions stirred. What if Ludwig had not been mad? What if his dreams had been a reaction to something unseen? Some inner truth the world was not ready for? Was he a prophet, crushed under the weight of a world too mundane for his visions? In 1933, as Hitler rose to power, Neuschwanstein's image was appropriated by the Nazi regime. They too saw power in myth. The SS considered turning the castle into a symbol of Aryan heritage. But something about it resisted. Several officials reported unease within its halls. Plans were quietly abandoned. During World War II, as Allied bombs fell across Germany, Neuschwanstein remained untouched. Not a single shell fell upon its towers. Some say it was deliberate. Others whisper that Ludwig himself, in some form, protected it. After the war, Ludwig's story found new life in film. In the 1950s and 60s, German cinema embraced him as a tragic hero. International interest followed. Japan, France, and even America developed obsessions with the Swan King. Disneyland's Sleeping Beauty Castle, modeled in part on Neuschwanstein, further embedded his legacy in global fantasy. And yet, for all the celebration, the mystery of his death continued to draw pilgrims. Every year, on June 13, candles appear along the shores of Lake Starnberg. Anonymous tributes, letters in cursive script left beneath trees, glass swan figurines resting on moss-covered stones. No one organizes these rites. They simply happen. Some claim descendants of his loyal servants keep the vigil. Others say it is Ludwig himself who draws them back, a magnetic pull from beyond the veil. What is clear is this: the Mad King did not vanish into history. He became its ghost, a ghost that sings, that dreams, that waits. Chapter 5. The Architect of Dreams. Long after his death, Ludwig's impact transcended even the boundaries of memory. He became not merely a figure of folklore, but an idea, a living question about the nature of beauty, power, and the cost of isolation. Scholars began to study him not only through historical documents, but through the architectural blueprints and personal writings he left behind. What emerged was a portrait of a man who designed his own mythology, brick by brick. Historians uncovered hundreds of pages Ludwig had written. Notes, sketches, dialogues, and treatises. They were hidden in sealed drawers, in archives long ignored, some encoded in archaic German script. Among these were his never-realized projects. A mountain observatory in the Alps that doubled as a temple to Apollo, a library with no books but walls inscribed with epic poetry, a tower where the stars would be charted not for science, but for prophecy. Modern architects, poring over his plans, found that many of Ludwig's impossible ideas were, with today's materials, entirely feasible. His obsession with space and sound, with light and symbolism, echoed principles now found in immersive design and virtual worlds. A university in Munich even began offering a course titled The Spatial Mythology of Ludwig II. It wasn't only architecture that drew attention. Psychologists debated whether Ludwig's seclusion was evidence of madness or a conscious rejection of a world that had lost its poetry. Some linked his behavior to high-functioning autism, others to bipolar disorder. But an emerging school of thought proposed something else entirely. That Ludwig had deliberately chosen to live in metaphor rather than in mediocrity. In the 21st century, his castles became pilgrimage sites, not only for tourists, but for dreamers. Writers, designers, filmmakers, spiritual seekers, all walked the halls of Neuschwanstein with notebooks and cameras, trying to decipher the code of his vision. One such visitor, a young composer from Seoul, wrote an entire symphony based on the acoustics of Ludwig's grotto. Another, a digital artist from Sao Paulo, recreated Linderhof in virtual reality, allowing users to explore the palace as Ludwig had imagined it, not as it was finished. His legacy took yet another form: the rise of what came to be known as the neo-romantic movement. In architecture, it echoed Ludwig's preference for symbolism over function. In music, it revived Wagnerian scale with modern sensibility. In politics, it urged a re-evaluation of leadership, not as management, but as vision. A small but influential think tank even published a white paper titled Kingdoms of the Mind, Ludwig II and the Future of Idealism. Not all reactions were reverent. Some critics argued that Ludwig's dreams were escapism, irresponsible indulgence at the cost of public welfare. Others saw in him the roots of totalitarian aesthetics, a dangerous precedent for using beauty to mask dysfunction. But the debate itself proved that Ludwig remained alive in the public conscience, eternally unsettled. In 2060, on the 175th anniversary of his birth, the Bavarian government unveiled the Ludwig Memorial Dome, a vast glass and marble structure that housed interactive exhibits, performances, and a digital archive of his letters and blueprints. It became one of the most visited cultural landmarks in Europe within 2 years. A plaque at its entrance bears a quote recovered from one of Ludwig's personal journals: "Let the world accuse me of madness. I am not here to explain the world, but to remake it in the image of longing." And perhaps, in that longing, Ludwig achieved the immortality denied to most kings. For while history has many rulers, it remembers few dreamers. And Ludwig was both, the last king of old Europe and the first sovereign of the unreal. Chapter 6. The King Beyond Time. It is said that every century grants the world one soul who is born not into it but despite it. Ludwig II of Bavaria belonged to no time, no nation, no structure that could contain him. As the decades unraveled and the 21st century marched further into the mechanized drone of modern life, his presence only grew, not in political power, but in imagination. Across digital platforms, Ludwig's name re-emerged in strange places. Online communities shared his journal excerpts. Animations were produced, retelling his life in surreal, operatic fragments. One AI-driven museum installation in Berlin projected a live-feed hallucination of what Ludwig's court might look like today, had it survived. A synthesis of medieval regalia and postmodern abstraction. His castles inspired architecture in space exploration modules designed not for efficiency but for beauty. A lunar-based prototype featured a chamber styled after the Hall of Mirrors, not for utility but for psychological balance. Even in space, one architect said, we need to remember the Earth once dreamed. In philosophy circles, Ludwig became an anchor of radical aestheticism. The belief that art and dream could offer a form of truth denied by reason. This belief did not claim that Ludwig was sane in the way his ministers required. It claimed that sanity itself was too small to measure someone like him. And still, questions endured. On the centennial of his death, a team of historians, scientists, and forensic analysts were given rare access to his personal effects. The project was sanctioned to create a full psychological profile. What they found defied expectation. His letters showed not delusion, but introspection. His budgets, though extravagant, were meticulously tracked. Even the famous midnight rides had purpose. They followed celestial alignments recorded in old Bavarian almanacs. Ludwig, it seemed, had not merely wandered, he was following stars. One scientist, overcome by the findings, wrote in the project's report, he was not lost in fantasy. He was building a message too large to decode in one lifetime.